We have step ups, we have tabletops, gap jumps, things you'd really only see in like intense short course truck racing or motocross events. They have all the connections, they know all the right people. It's just a lot easier. It's a very small industry. You can choose to be the bad boy in racing if you really want to, but you might be shutting out some opportunities down the road. Have a couple drivers that I'm friends with. I enjoy seeing them from time to time. At the end of the day, we're all essentially co-workers. The idea was to get as much seat time on the dirt as possible in order to prepare for the lights category. Now we've kind of transferred into more of a spec style racing for the supercar category. I'm a huge fan of iRacing, and like you had mentioned, dirt rally. It's very challenging to make it in the world, in the realm of professional motorsports, especially as you get and approach the higher levels.
Hello and welcome to episode 5 of our summer shutdown series here at Stripping the Dipping. You're joined by your usual co-host, Denzel Clarkson, aka AMG Denz. And in the street, they just call me Denz, but when I hop in the simulator, they call me the North London Ken Block. You know, and funnily enough, on the topic of Ken Block and driving cars and all different types of terrain, we've got a really cool guest for you guys today. You know, it's not every day I get the opportunity to interview a Rallycross world champion, so without any further delay, I'm happy to introduce that we have Cabot Bigham. Bro, thank you so much for joining us today, man. How are you keeping? And we're super excited to have you.
Oh, thanks for having me, guys. I'm doing well. I'm enjoying the summer here.
Oh, aren't we all? Aren't we all? You know, it's a great time for racing, great time for going on holiday and exploring different things as well. And on the topic of great weather, Cabot, you grew up in Reno, Nevada, a very hot kind of like area. What are your earliest motorsport memories, and how did you make the transition from being a business administration graduate on one spectrum to now a fully professional, successful, must I add, rallycross driver?
Well, my earlier memories, I moved around quite a bit as a kid. I was born in Santa Cruz, California, and then lived in Massachusetts for 10 years. And that was the bulk of my childhood, really, from the age of 7 to 17. And when I was out there, I discovered basically indoor karting, similar to like a K1 Speed or some sort of indoor kart track near you guys. And I just dove right in. I wanted to join their little summer racing league. I remember getting involved in that and asking for like private coaching lessons. And eventually that translated into me finding an outdoor kart track and purchasing my first outdoor European kart. And that's when I started running some local races, and that turned into regional stuff, and eventually found myself doing a couple national events. In Massachusetts, we have pretty hard winters. So half the year I wouldn't be able to train, and I was watching all my competitors just drive year round. And that's kind of what prompted me to move back to the West Coast and ultimately Reno to get that full year training experience.
Wow, that's really intriguing there, Cabot. And like you mentioned as well, like often when we're talking about drivers and the earliest memories and just that natural progression, one thing that we don't usually take into account often is like, the outdoor surroundings, the weather, time of year and stuff like that. Especially for what you do now as well. You can imagine that the more warmer, stronger heat would definitely be beneficial for that. So to kind of delve into that more as well, Cabot, you drive in a very competitive Nitro Rallycross series. And for our listeners at home who may be completely new to the world of rallycross driving, could you give them more insight into the series and what makes the approach to driving different, in rallycross driving in comparison to other driving series such as like normal kind of tarmac racing?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a great point because this is partly what attracted me to rallycross. My background was primarily road racing on tarmac. And then I saw one of my friends from karting driving in rallycross. And the beauty of rallycross is it attracts all types of different drivers and skills from around the motorsports industry. I mean, we have motocross racers, and we have dirt oval guys. We have people who raced in Formula One. Just you can get pretty much anyone from any different walk of life involved in rallycross because it incorporates that dirt aspect, the asphalt aspect, and even now with this new series Nitro, the jump aspect. We have step ups, we have tabletops, gap jumps, things you'd really only see in like intense short course truck racing or motocross events. So it's just like it combines all the coolest facets of motorsports into one sprint style racing format, and we just see all different types of people join. And it's really fun and cool to be able to meet these guys and race head to head with them.
Absolutely, it's a very exciting sport and series to follow, and just like you mentioned as well, the kind of unique element and combination of driving styles that you probably yourself seen when you're driving against some of these drivers too. And another aspect, kind of on the same theme as well, Cabot, is just how strategic you have to be with your driving too, because in rallycross driving, there's a unique thing which we don't have in any other series called a joker lap. Could you also explain how that works and kind of when you decide to pick your joker lap typically?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Joker lap, it's always fun to explain this to people because there's really nothing like it in motorsports besides rallycross. Basically, the Joker lap, depending on your series, is either a shorter or a longer route around the regular racing line. And we have to take that once per race. Some series allow you to take it first lap, others don't. But it really puts everything, it throws it all up in the air and it becomes a strategy play. So in rallycross, we have a spotter. Our races are typically anywhere from 6 to 8 laps in length. So they're very quick, very intense, standing start style. And you need that spotter to be able to communicate with you and time people in front of you and behind you to strategically place you in the joker at the right time. And that can mean getting a longer route out of the way so you don't get jumped. Or if it's a shorter path, maybe you can take it earlier and jump the people in front of you if you know you're faster. So it all comes down to split-second decisions, and you need to have that guy in the stand knowing exactly what's going on in the race, not only with you, but with the guys in front and behind you.
Absolutely. And just another interesting facet I wanted to explore there as well, Cabot. You mentioned how you have like a spotter, and it's interesting because in other series as well, like NASCAR, IndyCar, you usually have guys on roofs or kind of vantage points, so they have a really good view what's happening on the track as well. But kind of another kind of dynamic, which I guess doesn't get explained or explored enough, is like, what's the relationship between you and your spotter? Do you have the same spotter throughout your entire career and for all the events, or do you have different spotters for different scenarios?
Yeah, I think it's advantageous to keep the same spotter as long as you can because there needs to
Mhm.
be a good chemistry between you two. Things obviously get very intense in the car when you're door to door banging with people for a very short race. And saying the wrong thing at the wrong time can really take you out of your zone or piss you off or do something. So it's important, just like in a stage rally, to have your own kind of communication, your own dialect code language, so to speak. So you know that it's not going to upset you or distract you as you're driving. I personally have one of my best friends, Corey Sylvia. He's my spotter and does a lot of the agent roles for me as well. So we have a great relationship in that sense. But I have also used several different spotters in the past. I just haven't found as much success kind of floating around with those different people and almost having to reset and teach them what I want to hear and when every other race weekend.
Sure, and it's interesting to just hear how the dynamic plays into it. Having that symmetry and kind of connection with somebody you're more familiar with also kind of translates in the driving context as well when you're in those really intense battles. And it's really interesting to kind of hear that. So I'm glad that you kind of elaborated on that too. And something else, Cabot, I wanted to explore with you is that, you've driven some really pretty rad cross cars, namely your beloved and heavily modified Audi S1. I think
Yeah.
it's an S1, but yeah, could you like explain to the viewers like how you guys go about the process of building a car like that? Because at least to me, like when I looked at it, I was like, I've never seen like an Audi S1 like almost converted or stripped the hell out of, into rallycross cars. So it's super cool. It's not the conventional car like a Ford Fiesta or another kind of car. And what are your favorite traits about that particular car, and what strengths would you say it has in terms of its performance in relation to the other cars like the Subarus and the Fiestas?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, personally, I thought that the Audi S1 was one of the best looking rallycross cars out there, and it certainly was quick. Going about building these cars is a big task. I mean, these are not necessarily your off the dealer lot vehicles, right? They're purpose built tube frame chassis with easily hundreds of thousands of dollars in engine and transmission, axles, differentials, tuning, all kinds of stuff, fire safety, things like that. So these are really built to the nines uh, to be able to compete competitively in the rallycross realm, especially at the national or international level. And that being said, I think one of the better strengths as we approach this new electric era is, frankly, there's nothing that can replace the true noise of anti-lag and the backfire and the 3 foot flames you get. And when everyone's pinned off the limiter at the standing start, I mean, it's just a completely different experience. So I'd say their strengths really come down to driver and fan experience through noise. We also get the turbos and the blow off valves. And I think a lot of the rallycross fan base really stemmed out of, maybe some JDM experience. You really liked, maybe you liked the Fast and Furious back in the day. However you got involved with turbocharged engines, that's like the true heart of rally, the 2 liter turbo. And these are just built as powerful as they possibly can be. That being said, the electric car is truly amazing as well. That's instantaneous torque. You have incredible ability to tune the car in terms of where you want the torque, how linear you want it to be, and they've incorporated a gearbox, so you still have your gears and everything. So it's a really tough. It's a tough choice for me to say. Is the combustion car more, is it better or is it more fun than the electric car? It's a tough call. I think they both have their strengths and weaknesses, but the combustion noises and the feel you get with that crazy anti-lag system and 70 pounds of boost, you just can't replicate that.
Absolutely. And it's so interesting as well. You mentioned kind of the shift to the electrified aspect of the Nitro Cross series. And it's something I definitely want to discuss later on in this podcast, in terms of the development, what the kind of feedback is amongst the drivers too in relation to that. But also, like you mentioned, just having that internal combustion engine aspect of it, and having a turbocharged car, which gives you all of those frills and exhilarations as well, is something I think that would be kind of missed, and something as well, even for the fans, can get people into. Just even speaking generally about Audi, I know the S1 is really cool in its own aspect because it's like something that's completely bespoke and to its own. But Audi as a company as well, they're not completely new to rally. And of course, we had the Quattro, we had the Audi 90, and all of these kind of cars in the, like, I think early Group B kind of days, which are so interesting. And to see the technology evolve at each level, I think gives so many people different memories and stuff too. But on the topic of these cars as well, Cabot, you've also driven other rally cars, namely also the VW Beetle rallycross car too. And this was at a time that you actually signed for the legendary Andretti Autosport. Just for the fans, could you explain like how the opportunity happened with you and Andretti Autosport, and also like specifically just with those two cars, the Audi S1, which is front engined, I think, and then the Beetle, which I imagine was more rear engined. How does the driving dynamic change between the two?
Yeah, so all of the supercar cars are front engined, although the Beetle, by nature is a rear engine vehicle. Um, the biggest difference between the S1 and the Volkswagen was really, it seemed like wheelbase and width. The Volkswagen, it was longer, it was a little wider, but at the same time, I think that car had much more development time in it because of the fact that Volkswagen North America had stepped in. Tanner Faust and Scott Speed had developed that car with a manufacturer for easily 4 to 5 years, and it had just come so far where it was fast really no matter what. The Audi S1 was also, alongside Audi, developed a little bit, but not nearly to the extent that the Volkswagen was. And I think that it was very easy to tell the difference. Um, in racing, we kind of say that car is it's fast out the box, out the trailer. You just set it down and it's quick. I noticed that a lot more with the Volkswagen than the Audi. Not to say the Audi couldn't get there, but it wasn't nearly as quick naturally, especially when we started attending these Nitro Rallycross events where there were features that were unseen by both of these cars.
Sure.
So having that 4 to 5 years of development, true hardcore development, really was advantageous when we were trying to adapt the car to a new style of racing. As far as racing for Andretti goes, that was definitely one of the highlights of my career to date. I was blown away. I mean, the opportunity really came because Scott Speed had stepped away and was then a Subaru factory driver for Vermont Sports Car, which served him really well, and he did great things over at Subaru. And that allowed me to step in his place, partly because I had raced in the past with Brian Herta when he was running in the GRC series. And Brian Herta obviously has a great relationship with the Andretti family, working alongside them in IndyCar and whatnot. So that was kind of my foot in the door, so to speak. But that whole shop, the whole operation, every single engineer, mechanic, person at Andretti was really professional and very fun to work with. And I would love nothing more than to be able to race for that organization again. So hopefully they come around and start doing some nitro stuff down the road.
Oh, I could imagine it would be brilliant. And, we actually had, funnily enough, Mario Andretti on the podcast earlier on in the year. And just when we did the research for that as well, Cabot, the wide depths of racing that family's involved in, IndyCar, World Endurance Championships, NASCAR, and even, that stint in Rallycross too. It's just amazing to see how passionate they are. And also an interesting thing I learned there as well is just, your connection with Brian Herta, the dad of obviously Colton Herta, and just seeing how interlinked it is as well. It's really interesting to see how the Rallycross kind of segment intertwines with those kind of racing dynasties as well. So really interesting. And then going back to the comparisons, between the Beetle and the S1 as well, it's really intriguing just to hear the kind of technical differences with the cars. And one thing I wanted to kind of elaborate on there as well, Cabot, was, you mentioned kind of the Volkswagen having a bit more of a longer wheelbase. And obviously the Audi S1 is like a compact hatchback car in its natural kind of derivative form. But what's the difference, would you say, performance-wise, between a long wheelbase and a short wheelbase car for viewers? Because at least in Formula One, I think Mercedes were going for a longer wheelbase car for certain seasons, and it would mean that, at tracks like Suzuka, where you need like a lot of high-speed stability through corners, the car would seem to excel quite well. But then obviously at tracks like Monaco, where you have a long wheelbase car, the car is a bit harder to kind of pivot and to kind of point on the nose, and it probably induces a bit more understeer. Does that translate in Rallycross as well?
Yes, absolutely. It's almost identical. The only difference being you also feel the differences on dirt. They are similar. Those long duration or mid speed dirt corners where you have a little bit more slip angle and you carry that for longer periods of time. A longer wheelbase car seems to excel quite well. Specifically the Subaru. I think the Subaru is easily the longest wheelbase in Rallycross and Nitro specifically. Whereas the Audi was, like you said, very easy to drive on the nose, could change directions quite quick. So in terms of like hairpins and accelerating off of hairpins, it did a really good job. But with the dirt, I think the longer wheelbase does help you more so than not, just because you have the ability to put the power down. But what we're dealing with in these loose grip conditions is how effectively can you put power to the ground. We all run the same tire. We all run similar horsepower and torque. So it really comes down to how you set the car up and the natural way it was designed and engineered. I think Subaru, is one of the fastest cars to date in terms of the Nitro series. They seem to have found the sweet spot. They can keep up with the short wheelbase cars and really tight point and shoot type of corners, and they're also quite a bit quicker in the long duration dirt corners as well. And we don't see too much asphalt with the Nitro series. I know they're trying to get more and more of that as we go forward. In fact, the best track we had for asphalt was at the Firm in Florida, which was really a great mixture of dirt and asphalt. Arguably 50-50, maybe 60-40 favoring dirt, but still quite a bit of asphalt there as well.
Absolutely, and it's so like intriguing as well just to see how it makes a difference and just how it plays out as well. And as you mentioned, just kind of Subaru being a legacy company in regards to, rallying and rallycross as well, probably have that edge. But then like, I also like the idea of an underdog coming in as well. And like, like somebody like you and your team, like taking S1, which, is not necessarily a kind of normal kind of rallycross car, and then doing the conversion, doing all the work to kind of build it into something that could take on such a behemoth. So it's very fascinating and also cool because I guess it means that it's not so predictable in terms of out and out winner every single track and every single race. And there's always going to be kind of, I guess, circuits or tracks that suit one car more than maybe the other.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the best case scenario is you build a car that can be competitive at most of the tracks. But the nature of racing is everyone's going to constantly be developing and trying to get faster and faster. And those who don't do that or maybe slip up and go the wrong direction will eventually be surpassed. So that dynasties are great. Volkswagen was champion for 4 years in a row, maybe 5 years in a row. And then Subaru has won several championships in a row. So it constantly, switches.
Absolutely. Now, onto another new topic, Cabot. I think Georgie needs to bring out my DeLorean time machine because I'm going to take you back to 2016. That was a phenomenal year for you. You won the Global Rallycross Championship in the lights class. Question to you, Cabot, was how did you go about preparing for the championship that year? And what were some of the biggest challenges you had to overcome to be able to deliver results consistently throughout that season?
Yeah, so at that point, that was my first year in Rallycross, and I had virtually no dirt experience. So I at facilities like Dirt Fishing and Rally Ready out in Austin, Texas. And the sole idea was to get as much seat time on the dirt as possible in order to prepare for the lights category. I was even fortunate enough to be able to test the lights car with not only the team I won the championship with, Dreyer and Reinbold, but also with Dirtfish because they at the time were running a team in lights as well. So that was the bulk of it. I think as far as staying in shape, I've always gone back to my shifter cart. My shifter cart, obviously you have a lot of high G scenarios. It's a really good workout. And if you race them, then you can work on your racecraft as well. Then you can all of a sudden jump into something with some doors and a cage and feel a lot more confident diving in on the brakes. But one of the bigger challenges, I think, outside of the dirt was just getting to know the lights car throughout the course of the season. Because at that point, I think we were doing 10 or 12 rounds of racing in a season, which was great. But those cars seemed a little finicky with certain sensors and harness issues. It seemed like a lot of the time we were chasing electronic stuff, which is really frustrating for not only the mechanics, but for the drivers, because it's very challenging to pinpoint those issues. The cars were also a little weak, and this was by design, with wheel-to-wheel contact. So you would very quickly lose your steering alignment or things like that, or even break a tie rod or something when you were trying to be a little aggressive and pass somebody. So you had to get really good at car placement and making sure you were door to door and not driving too aggressively in order to keep your car competitive and in one piece. So that took me quite a bit of time to do. In fact, I was in third place when the last race came up. So I was third in points. and we were having an electronic issue all weekend with some sort of cam sensor thing. So I was going into limp mode, and it seemed like the championship was kind of thrown out the door at that point. I was like, all right, well, I'll probably finish third. I finally made it into the final. I started dead last in 10th. And as we start the race, by the second corner, P1 and P2 in points had crashed into each other, and I had passed every single person on the inside and was in second place behind my teammate. And then
Wow.
and then he started having a camshaft issue, sensor issue, and I passed him, and I ended up beating the second place person in points by 1 point.
Wow,
It
that
was just a
is
miracle.
yeah, it's a crazy story, Cabot. But again,
Yeah.
like, and kind of the leading question to follow up from that is like, how important, is the psychological aspect of, racing in such an intense and, short kind of, short but kind of like very intense kind of like race? Because you mentioned that it's very easy, and I could see why a driver would be irritated by some of the technical issues, either with the electrics or maybe a bad kind of stewarding decision that goes against you,
Yeah, absolutely.
or
Yeah.
or stuff like that. But like, how do you overcome the psychological aspect of it as well?
I think everyone has their own method. For me, I do some controlled breathing and try and get into more of a Zen state. That's what had worked for me in asphalt racing quite a bit. The nature of rallycross racing is a little bit more aggressive and competitive. So instead of being calm like I'm about to take a nap, I try and hype myself up, but keep myself focused and not let the butterflies in my stomach take over and psych me out. So there's this really fine line to navigate on in order to keep your mental acuity there and stay calm.
Absolutely, and staying calm is key as well to, making the right decisions and just having that composure in those situations as well. So it's very interesting to kind of see how that also plays a huge role too. And whilst we're on the topic, kind of like driving and kind of being in the car as well, do you have any pre-race rituals, anything unorthodox or anything that you like to do before you put your put the helmet on and strap it into the car?
Yeah, no, for sure. I grew up reading Ross Bentley's Speed Secrets book, which I highly recommend to anyone who likes racing. You might find stuff you take away from it. You might find stuff that seems excessive, but it's a great read. I think he's got 2 or 3 books out, Ross Bentley. And so there's one method where you basically take your right hand and you bring your left knee up, and you're doing these knee touches across your body. And the idea behind that is to kind of get your left and right lobe in your brain synchronized. And I've just done that for years, and I swear by it. So I'll do that for about 30 seconds usually. And then when I get in the car, I use custom molded earbuds. And this is weird, and some people find it gross, but I lick one and I lick the other and I put them in. And I don't know what that does. It's one of those weird, unorthodox things that I do, and I just feel ready once I'm in the car.
Well, if it works, Cabot. And I mean, it's interesting, and I like when drivers actually have something like that because we've interviewed other drivers on the series, and it's just like, oh, I just put the helmet on and I just get in the car. It's like, nah, man, I want to hear something peculiar or something really
For
different. So
sure.
I'm
Yeah.
glad you discussed that, and also hand-eye coordination. You also said kind of like stimulating the lobes as well. So when you get in the car, everything's kind of sharp and ready to go is key. So very interesting to see that.
Yeah.
And kind of the next question as well, Cabot, is I respect rallycross drivers heavily because, it's such a technical and very precise way of driving with the aggression that you mentioned as well that you kind of need when you're going door to door with other drivers. But, there's lots of tricky and challenging rallycross circuits across the world. You've got the likes of Lydden Hill in England. You've got the Estering. There's even a track called Hell, listeners, and that's located in Norway, as some of the craziest elevation changes as well. But for you, Cabot, like, what's the trickiest rallycross circuit you've experienced, and how did you go about learning it?
Oh, that's a great question. I'd say one of the trickier tracks that we ever went to was, let's see, you know, Florida the one I mentioned earlier was
Mhm.
was a bit challenging because now the asphalt wasn't so hard, but you know a lot of the track was pretty narrow, and it was a lot of high speed straightaways, more so than we've seen at any other track. So I feel like that I particularly struggled there, just getting up to speed quickly, as well as we had on the nitro circuit. We also went to a track in Arizona at Wild Horse Pass, Wild Horse Motorsports Park, and we had a lot of motocross features there, including a step up that was going uphill. So in order to get the right amount of speed going up that hill, you basically had to feel like you were going to over jump it. And for whatever reason, I had some sort of mental block doing that, and I was it took me a long time to get that jump particularly right. But I eventually did, and that was one of our best results and finishes in the 21 season. So those are two very challenging tracks. I think anything with nitro uh, is challenging by nature, but for whatever reason, those ones gave me a little bit of trouble.
Oh, I could definitely understand why, and it's intriguing just to see the approach, and sometimes it's just like it's tricky because of the car, or maybe also it can be tricky just because it's just developing, I guess, and building that kind of faith and trust and confidence as the weekend goes by. We see it in other race series too, in rally, when you've got a co-driver and like a driver, and it's just like the driver saying that they want the instructions in a particular way to kind of enable them to drive on the limit in a particular way as well. Even in Formula One, you see some drivers kind of push the car very hard in the practice session to know where the limits are, and then as the weekend progresses, that kind of mental block that maybe they had, it slowly goes away as they build the confidence. So again, very interesting to see how like transparent and how actually transferable that is in rallycross driving too. And I know, like you mentioned as well, like with the Nitro series, they really push the emphasis, on the track designs, and some of them are some of the quirkiest I've seen, if I must say so myself.
Oh
So
yeah,
really cool.
absolutely. Yeah.
So another thing I wanted to explore as well, Cabot, and it's like you can read my notes, man, because like I've got a kind of list of different things to discuss and to explore with you as well. But you kind of hit the nail on the head earlier with, just what's happening with the world right now in terms of the push for reducing carbon emissions and encouragement of electrified hybrid vehicles. Obviously, this year in the Nitro Rallycross series, there's a new class of electrified vehicles. I think they're built and known as the FC1-X series, but you can definitely, correct me if I'm wrong on that. And in relation to that platform of vehicles, it's using a battery powered kind of SUV platform. And just for the fans out there as well, it's a very exciting joint venture between QEV Technologies and also Olsberg's MSC, which I think are like a rally put specified company too. So the project's received a lot of manufacturer support from the likes of Ford, Volkswagen. We mentioned Subaru as well. But from your perspective, Cabot, like, could you tell us about the transition, obviously, from the internal combustion engine to fully electric rally cross cars? And, how have you had to like adapt your driving style? Because one thing you mentioned that I didn't even know about was that they still put gears actually in the cars, which is pretty cool. So it's still quite engaging for you guys rather than it just being like a throttle and brake exercise. And on top of that as well, with battery powered or electrified vehicles too, you've got that instantaneous torque demand from the battery system too. So how does that also play a role in things?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So the FC1X stands for first corner, which is technically the name of the car company,
Mhm.
and that is being built by, like you said, QEV and Olsberg's MSE, which is a really interesting car. I actually had the chance to go test that in Spain at the Barcelona track. And the 1X, essentially, the X is for Rallycross. That is the model, so to speak. The car is really interesting as far as like from a driver's perspective. You talked about it just there, but you have this instantaneous torque and literally just the ability to plug into it and make that thing produce an extra 300 horsepower or 300 foot-pounds of torque. And that's really interesting, and it's a lot of fun. As far as driving, from the driving perspective, you do have the gearbox still, but we, instead of having 6 gears, we only have 3, and they're in a paddle
Oh,
shifter form. They're no longer a sequential bump shift. So it's a lot more ergonomical, and as a result of having half the gears are longer or taller. Um, so you don't have to shift nearly as much. And with all that torque, you could essentially keep it in third gear the whole time if you really wanted to. And what that does is it gives the driver a lot more time to focus on the corners and what's going on around them. And it really was an eye-opening and enjoyable driving experience for me, because there's so much happening in those rallycross combustion cars where you're shifting all the time. I mean, I'll leave a race weekend and be really sore with my right arm because you're trying to fight wheel lockup and all this stuff, and you're constantly taking your hand off the wheel to shift. That's kind of eliminated with this new electric car. And I know that there's a lot of people saying that there's not noise. It'll never be the same as combustion. And they're right in some regard, but there is noise still. And these cars are built to outperform the combustion cars. And I think they're doing an excellent job of that already. So it'll be really exciting to see as this battery technology exponentially evolves, how much we can really squeeze out of this electric car platform. Smaller motors that produce more output, uh, lighter and more powerful inverters, smaller batteries, maybe solid state batteries down the road instead of our current cell pack batteries that you'd see in a Tesla or even in a cell phone. So there's a lot of really cool stuff coming down the way. And as these manufacturers get involved on a heavier level, we're going to see that take off even quicker. And I think people will eventually uh, get away from, the fact that the sound is different, the noise is different, because ultimately the racing is still the same, if not better, and we will be going faster. That's just the simple nature of it.
Absolutely, and Cabot, thank you for explaining that as well, because it's such a kind of transitionary thing, I guess, like you mentioned, not only for the drivers, the technicians, the manufacturers, but more importantly, also the fans, and for them to kind of get that insight, for them to, see that the racing is still highly competitive. Now there's actually more of a driver emphasis, on like carrying speed through corners, also, I guess, using the battery in an efficient way as well, and driving the car in a unique way that suits the style is super key. And I think what's also promising, like you touched on there too, is that the technology that's being developed and the data that's being collected from this exercise is something which will help cars, normal road cars that we're going to have access to, and normal people like myself may have to turn to as an alternative in the future as well. And it's Rallycross along with other motorsport series, which is like the pioneering test bed for a lot of these ideas as well. So it's super interesting.
Absolutely. And one more thing to touch on is it's in years past, you've had these combustion cars and a relatively open rule book, meaning you can change virtually anything as long as you're within some of the confines, 2-liter turbo, certain weight, things like that. Now we've kind of transferred into more of a spec style racing for the supercar category, because everyone gets the same FC1X car and we have the same capability of tuning and changing things. So now you're going to see not only more driver based racing, but you'll also see which teams are better at setting this car up. Because ultimately, we're not using different components like we would in the Volkswagen over the S1 or the Ford M Sport over the Subaru. So everyone's on the same platform now, and I think now as we see that develop, we're going to watch younger drivers or different drivers start rising to the top because there won't be that crazy advantage. Let's say a team had a $5 million budget one year to develop and test the car, whereas a privateer team had 1.1 million. I mean, that right there will speak volumes in performance, and that can still happen, but you're not going to really be that much further ahead, as we've just recently started from scratch. We're started from square one here with the FC1X. So that'll be really, really cool to watch and compete in moving forward.
Absolutely, it's exciting because, like you mentioned as well, like actually everyone has a more kind of fairer, I guess, opportunity. And in that sense, it's not a case where there's like the cars are exactly the same and the setup's exactly the same, and you lose that kind of customization, that kind of like uniqueness as well, which each driver will have. I'm sure that there'll probably be different things with the ride heights, different things with the brake bias as well, different kind of parameters you can still play around with, which could ultimately result in like different results, different kind of driving styles, different kind of approaches we see from the drivers. And like you mentioned as well, just I think it's a good business model, because obviously you've got like, if it's just a case where it's Subaru or Volkswagen and they're the huge manufacturers, then their budgets are quite big. But then if you have a private team, or like an entrepreneur that's always had an itch for racing and now wants to get involved in it, then like you mentioned as well, this is like an avenue for them to get involved in, and it's good for the environment. It has its benefits in that regard too.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I remember one interesting thing is now that we've, as a driver who's been in combustion racing my whole life, I'm pretty familiar with the fire safety protocol and all these things. But now that I've gone into this electric field, we've had to do several safety briefings just to know exactly like how to get out of a car that's statically charged, or not statically, but just charged. Mechanics have to go through their own training to make sure that they're not going to get electrocuted. There's just it's a new world, so a lot of people are like, oh, they're seeing these electric bike batteries burn houses down, or they're seeing electric cars combust into flames. And I mean, there is a danger and an element to that I understand. As far as the racing world goes, we're going to be testing the absolute limits of these cars, and I think that's advantageous to consumers. Like you had mentioned, you're going to see that technology transfer over. So if we have an issue, manufacturers can research it and put that to work in their consumer cars. So that'll be another advantage of this electric field.
Absolutely, Cabot. And whilst we talked obviously about the advantages of the benefits and like advantages as well of going down this field too with the Nitro series, just from the driving perspective as well, has there been any limitations, with the new cars? Is there anything which you think still needs to be improved at all?
I mean, obviously, you could make the argument that there are combustion cars like the Subaru that still need to be improved, just because that's what racing is by nature. But with the electric car, the first thing that came to my mind was how aggressive the torque and horsepower were with very minimal throttle input. And I know it's a simple fix for the most part to be able to essentially draw your own throttle curve. Might be easier than even a combustion car. But when I first drove it, that's what I noticed. I was like, okay, well, I'm on almost a purely asphalt track, and I'm using very, very minimal throttle input. And it's basically just lighting up all four tires and driving sideways. So I think as far as the drivability goes, there's a lot you can do to make it easier. Every driver has their own preference, but mine would personally be a little bit more calm or tame in that sense on the pedal. Because you're getting shaken around quite a bit on these rutted up dirt sections. You're having to be extremely precise with your throttle is not always easy. So if you can have a little bit of margin for error there, I think you'll find it a lot easier to drive consistently and competitively.
That's really interesting, Cabot. And like whilst you were saying that as well, I was thinking like from maybe an engineering point of view as well, maybe the team might look to, work with you on that, and perhaps maybe, I don't know, develop like a throttle map or different throttle maps, So maybe on one particular segment of the track, you can go to a map which is a more linear kind of like throttle kind of curve. And then maybe in a different section of the track, you can have a different map which produces kind of a different torque curve with the battery too. So that actually would be quite interesting.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And the suspension that they've incorporated onto that car is great. I think it's called the RS3 damper. And it's a very capable damper, and it's I think it's well suited to the FC1X as well.
Oh, perfect, man. So no porpoising for you then. That's
No
always
yeah.
that's always a bright one to put on the checklist. So no, interesting. Cabot, we'll move on to the next segment of questions then, because I wanted to get into the personalities as well of, the drivers and kind of like understanding and exploring the world of rallycross driving. So to kind of get into it, you've had some fierce battles with the likes of Travis Pastrana, even an ex F1 driver and Scott Speed as well. What would you describe the atmosphere like between yourself and the other drivers generally? Is it as intense as F1 where you get certain drivers that don't like each other or certain drivers that are quite cliquey with each other? Or is it something more like IndyCar where it's like, I don't want to call it like a fraternity, but it's more just chilled out and everybody turns up on the day and, not as like, cats and daggers as they like to say.
Yeah, I think it's kind of a hybrid between the two. There are definitely drivers that are there not only as competitors, but they'll treat you as friends, off the track as well. There are drivers that are all business and they just want to exclusively show up, do as best as they can. They're not there to make friends, and they're just about the racing. So I'd say it's probably a hearty 50-50 in terms of the paddock as to which category you fall into. But to be honest, I don't think one is necessarily better than the other. I see both. I see the advantages of both. I personally have a couple drivers that I'm friends with. I enjoy seeing them from time to time. At the end of the day, we're all essentially coworkers. Whether you're friends or not, you guys do the same thing. You're in the same industry. It's a small industry in the grand scheme of things. But there are times when I don't want to talk to anyone and I just want to be dead focused on my car, especially if you're competing for the championship. There's no real reason to be going around and talking unless that's a way for you to calm down, and kind of take a break from the intense adrenaline and, in the sport. So yeah, it's a 50-50 split.
It's interesting, and I guess for the fans too, there's like an array of different personalities and kind of people you can follow. And Cabot, for you, you're amazing. You've actually got your own clothing line, which I want to come back to at some stage as well. But yes, it's so kind of cool just to see that even in like the world of rallycross, you've got so many different drivers, different backgrounds. And a good segue question kind of on this topic as well, Cabot, was there's so many notable rallycross drivers. You mentioned the likes of Tanner Faust, amazing driver, even did a stint on Top Gear, which is really cool as well. You've got other drivers as well, like Chris McKay, English driver. For yourself, like even when you were a kid and even just like now, were there any drivers that you like grew up watching that really inspired you, or any drivers now on the grid that like you feel like you learn a lot from, or you kind of find aspirational in a way?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, an obvious one for me is I grew up watching Travis Pastrana, not necessarily driving, but doing all this crazy nitro circus stuff. So it was a very full circle experience when I ended up driving in the Nitro Rallycross series. So that was pretty cool. And then being able to compete against Travis and see him every weekend and have small conversations with him. And at one point, we were talking about trying to build a track here in Reno. Unfortunately, that track ended up shutting down. But there's no reason that can't happen down the road. So that was really cool. As far as mentors, so to speak, I'd say Steve Arpin was a great guy to kind of bounce ideas off of or ask, because he seemed pretty genuine. Even though we're competing against each other, I'd always trust what he had to say. Scott Speeds, he seemed hit or miss to me. I'd have great conversations with him, and then other times it seemed like what he was saying wasn't genuine. So it was tough. Everyone's different. It's just kind of like how you can read other people is what it comes down to. But yeah, I'd say Travis was the main guy. Obviously Tanner Faust, I knew by proxy watching his movies where he was a stunt driver, things like that. Top Gear, like you had mentioned, I had seen him on Top Gear quite a few times. And then Ken Block as well. He was kind of that whole Hoonigan era that was starting right when I was kind of getting into racing. And he hasn't done so much as of late with Rallycross, but when I first joined, he was running in supercars, so that was exciting to race against him as well.
Oh, I could imagine, and like you mentioned there too, like there's such an array of different drivers from like different backgrounds as well, and even just like knowing kind of you mentioned the Scott Speed thing, like it's I don't really like talking about other drivers behind their backs, but like it's quite kind of publicly known that Scott's a very interesting kind of like character, and even in his F1 days, he's quite controversial in that kind of Toro Rosso family he was in as well. So it's interesting to even know even in Rallycross he's still kind of the same like Scott Speed he was back in F1 too when I was following that. So very interesting. And as you mentioned as well, Ken Blocks is so awesome, man. And just like the hooligan stuff and just again, just seeing how transferable the skills are, as like driving a car and kind of getting those Hollywood slides and creating something really cinematic, which even to non-car people, if they watch like a Ken Block piece, it's just like, wow, I didn't know a driver could do this. This goes to show the breadth of ability when it comes to rallycross drivers.
Yeah, and Ken's really interesting because he got into racing so late. He had his great success with his business at DC, and even before that, I forget what company he was with. But he came up through that and then decided, you know what, this is pretty rad. I'm going to start trying this stuff, and then built a massive brand around it. And he's made a great life for himself doing it. So I haven't really. It's rare to see people become that competitive and that talented when they start that late.
True, very true there, Cabot. And a smooth segue, I must say, myself in relation to branding is, I mentioned it just a couple of seconds ago as well. Like you have your own clothing line brand called the Oink brand, which I think was very clever marketing from your side, if I must say myself. As a play
Thank
on
you.
your nickname too, the Big Ham. How did the idea come about? In terms of starting your own clothing line. What are your other hobbies outside of driving competitively in the Rallycross championships?
Yeah, well, I really like. I'm an outdoorsy kind of guy. I like going out and camping and off-roading, fishing, things like that. It doesn't necessarily play into the Oink brand clothing line at the moment, but we are revamping it as we speak to maybe incorporate some of those things that I do and love to do outside. Having some stuff you can use for camping or hiking or summer activities, stuff like that. Maybe some outdoor gear. I also enjoy golf quite a bit. I really like doing that. So yeah, it's fun to have that merchandise. You can get creative with it on the side. Um, but the Oink brand thing really came about because I had originally worked with this company called Coforce, and specifically this guy Parker Tank, um, or yeah, Parker Tank Smith, I believe is his full name, and he created my logo, and was like, we need to do this whole play on words, like you need to do stuff and work with this, and I thought, oh, that's kind of funky, I like the logo, but it seems kind of weird, and it ended up growing. It has some pretty good legs under it right now. It's been probably 5 years running, so I'm really excited that I got to keep it going this long. And like I said, we're going to throw a bunch of cool new products out there coming up. So be sure to take a look.
Absolutely, it's very exciting times for yourself, and like you mentioned too, it's great that it's not just limited to like clothing, but you've also diversified it. So there's gonna be other kind of things fans and just people generally can find and buy as well that they'll be able to utilize, in their adventures with camping, and it like ties into the things and interests and hobbies you have as well. So it's really awesome to see how like transferable that all is. And one other thing I wanted to ask you about as well, Cabot, was myself, like I'm kind of into sim racing as one of my like huge hobbies. What are your thoughts on sim racing platforms like iRacing? Because I know that they also kind of have like a kind of dirt oval, but also rallycross kind of aspect to their simulator. Obviously, as well through the likes of Ken Block too, we've seen the rise of like the dirt rally franchise take off and be quite popular. With the younger ones like me, trying to get experienced and trying to kind of find out more about like rallycross driving. What's your take on that kind of like element, and how realistic would you say some of those simulators are in relation to like rallycross driving?
Yeah, I think I'm a huge fan of iRacing, and like you had mentioned, Dirt Rally I really enjoy as well. I do a lot of practice on my simulator. As far as how realistic it is, it seems like the tire model is not as realistic as it could be. It's getting better. But it's just something that's kind of a little bit funky, like the limit of the tire, at what point it goes sideways, what point are you actually gaining traction. So when you're really nitpicking tenths of a second on a lap, that can kind of get in the way. Another big thing or drawback with sim racing is there is a point at which you can start to develop bad habits.
Sure.
Driving in a real car on a real track, you know that your ass is on the line. You're the one who's going to get injured if you crash. You're the one who has to pay for the damages of the car if you crash. So there's a mental aspect there that you don't get when you can just press escape and reset the car.
Sure.
And also you have G-force and sound and how to feel beneath in your ass. How do you feel exactly what the car needs? What is it doing here? What is it doing there? I know there are sims in the neighborhood of $100,000 nowadays, but even with those axes and things, you're still not going to fully get that G-force replicated. And you need to be able to feel and be able to communicate with your engineer with real time laps, in the real world. But that being said, there is a massive advantage to using the sim because you can really dial in all those muscle memory functions, and you can work on your racecraft quite well without having to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars in damage. You might get yelled at on a text chain, but that's about it, dude. And that seems like a pretty good trade-off to me.
Oh, exactly. And trust me, I've been on the receiving end of those very blasphemous messages as well.
Yeah,
When,
for sure.
I've accidentally steamed down the inside of somebody on turn one, or
Yeah,
maybe
exactly.
gone for a move I shouldn't have gone for. I know Senna always said if you no longer go for a gap, you're no longer a racing driver. But I think in sim racing, that cliche probably gets taken out of context too many times.
I think it's a little out of context. I agree.
Absolutely. Well, Cabot, there's another kind of thing I wanted to explore with you as well, man, before we wrap up this segment, because it's been so insightful and really exciting as well to hear from you. We also discussed, off air that you had unfortunately had the kind of thing of contracting COVID twice. Like COVID, whether people agree or disagree, it completely changed, how I guess we go about our day-to-day lives, and there was a long period of time where a lot of people, were out of work and finding it hard to kind of like get back into like a strive and a groove. Obviously with you as well, it had a lot of effect on some of your senses as well. Could you just, for the listeners, explain just like how you came about kind of like getting through some of the difficulties of COVID and just generally life during the pandemic too? Because I know there wasn't much racing and stuff like that as well, which affects a lot of people's livelihoods.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of it came down to staying in contact with close friends and family and kind of refining your inner circle. There were a lot of people that it seemed as though they went a little crazy or they showed their true colors during that pandemic. So being able to identify who was really important to you for the long run and stay in contact with them, whether it's FaceTime or Zoom or whatever it was really important. For me, it was sim racing. And every now and then I'd hop on Xbox and I'd be running some Call of Duty, whatever it was, to keep the social element going was really big. As far as the senses and the long-term effects of COVID, I think it just takes time and a positive attitude to try and recover from that. My sense hasn't fully recovered, my sense of smell. But eventually you kind of learn to adapt. I mean, that's what humans do. We just adapt. So being able to take your mind off something that's bumming you out, whatever way possible, is super crucial. And again, for me, that happened to be the social element.
Absolutely, and I think the key things you mentioned there as well, man, is just kind of having that outlet, to release, and obviously keeping the social aspect too. So you don't alienate yourself from other people, or a lot of people. There's always the expression, "A problem shared is a problem halved" in that regard, and a lot of people are going through a similar thing. So I agree with you, and on top of that as well, it's just the perseverance too, to not let it define you or to not let it restrict you, but to find kind of positive outlets to continue going, to keep your head up and to adapt, like you said, which is so key too. And on the topic as well, Cabot, of like career advice, what advice would you give to a younger Cabot Bigham? And like, what advice would you give to younger kids? And is there anything you would have done differently, in your junior career, and things that maybe you would say to like parents of kids that, want to pursue a career in the world of rallycross driving?
Yeah. Firstly, rallycross is a tough sport to get into, mainly because you have these ladder systems and these scholarships and things, and in Formula Car and maybe even sports car, and that doesn't really exist so much in rallycross. Not to say it won't, because that has definitely been a recognized problem within the rallycross community. Um, what I can offer as far as advice is hindsight is always 2020. So don't get beat yourself up or get yourself down when you made a mistake or you spent too much money and it didn't end up working out for you. Those are all very valuable learning lessons. It's very challenging to make it in the realm of professional motorsports, especially as you get and approach the higher levels. For me, the jump between the lights car and the supercar was almost 3 times the price per year. And then that's outside of crash damage. That's outside of the series saying, "Oh, we're going to add 5 more rounds." Boom, there goes the price again. It's
Mhm.
it's very challenging. Doing the cold calls to get sponsorship is very difficult. You're going to get thousands of no's and maybe a yes. My recommendation would be to try and find someone in motorsports who is a professional, who has had experience with sponsors, and find a someone who has dedicated their life to raising money for motorsports, because the Rolodex, the connections that they have are going to far supersede you know your 9 to 5 cold calling people. They're going to know the right people to talk to and when and what time of year. There's a lot of nuance to the sponsorship hunt, and ultimately money makes the world go round. Money makes racing work. So you need someone like that when you assemble your team, so to speak, to handle those things. You can be the face of it. You can develop a relationship with them, but getting your foot in the door is something that should be left to the professionals and the people that have been in this industry for 40 plus years. And that's why you see these second and third generation drivers seamlessly go straight to the top, or to, let's say, F2 or lights right out the gate,
Mhm.
because because they have all the connections, they know all the right people. It's just a lot easier. It's a very small industry. Another thing would be to always watch what you say, because it will come back to haunt you. Um, you can choose to be the bad boy in racing if you really want to, but you might be shutting out some opportunities down the road. So if you want to make this a long lasting career, my suggestion is watch what you say, and just know that the professionals need to handle the sponsorship stuff. It's very challenging.
Absolutely, Cabot. And there's so many gems of knowledge and good insight as well that I think a lot of our listeners can take away from that as well. So thank you for explaining that. And I think we need to have you on in a future episode, man, because that is also another aspect I didn't even really take into account, but it's a huge thing as well. Like having sponsorship, being able to kind of fund a seat as well, and like you mentioned, like championships often in this kind of day and age can change from like the kind of drop of a pin. So being able to kind of fund a season, of competitive racing as well is a thing I think a lot of people overlook. And as you said as well, like there's professionals out there that specialize in that kind of realm too, and being able to utilize those people and get the maximum out of them as well can only help you in that regard as well. So it's so key, and I'm really glad that you mentioned that as well.
Oh, yeah, of course. I mean, there's so much to talk about there. I agree. I'd happily come back on and do something like that, just to make it easier and get some more people, some more talented individuals in motorsports.
Oh, well, we'd all appreciate that, Cabot, and we definitely need to line, another episode up, hopefully maybe later down in the year as well. And we can obviously track your progress, which is kind of a smooth segue to the kind of final bit I wanted to bring as well, Cabot, is how can new fans follow you and the sport remotely? Because, you're an amazing driver, super talented, relatable as well, and super humble as well, man. So I know this episode is going to go down very popularly with our fans
I
and so
appreciate
forth
it.
as
Thank you.
well. You're welcome. And yeah, just like where can they follow you, and also how do they go about following the world of Nitro Rallycross racing too? Are the races streamed like readily available on street like services like YouTube, and just generally as well, like how can our listeners go about like tracking and following your progress throughout the series?
Yeah, of course. Nitro, you can follow through their various social media channels. They have an Instagram, Nitro Rallycross. I believe they have a Facebook as well. They have a YouTube page. As far as watching the races, their website, nitrorallycross.com, can point you in the right direction. I believe they have a spot with NBC Sports, or actually NBC Primetime. For those of you who have cable or access to the app on a smart TV. As far as following me, I have an Instagram that I use more often than not. That is Cabot_Bigham. Was originally Follow the Ham, but we're playing the game of how to get verified on Instagram, and it's not easy. So either way, if you just type in Cabot, it'll probably be one of the three people in this world named Cabot. And then my website is followtheham.com. And the merchandise is available via followtheham.com or oinkbrand.com. But yeah, that's pretty much the gist of it. We will be putting out some pretty cool content this year. I'm actually going to be attending the Grid Life event in Colorado. I believe it's in September. We're going to be participating in their little stage rally that is put on by Rally Ready, a rally driving school out of Austin, Texas. So be sure to stay tuned for that. We have a cool little build video coming out on how we're modifying my stage rally car.
That is so awesome, Cabot, and I think as well insightful, and it's amazing, because back in the day when we were watching Rallycross and all these other series as well, it was always difficult, and I always felt there was a gap between the fan or the consumer and the driver in the sport. But now, because of sensational drivers like yourself, man, we finally actually get insight as to what goes on, what considerations are made, life between yourself, your engineers, your mechanics, and it just brings the sport, from a 2D kind of perspective into 3D one where it's so immersive and allows us to kind of get great depth of perception of what's going on as well. So it's been amazing to have you on this episode as well, man. Georgina's going to be putting your social media links and the link to the website as well. It's a great name for a website too when we do release this episode. But Cabot, I just want to say a huge shout out to you, man. Like, we wish you all the best of success with the series as well. We know that you're going to absolutely smash it, and we're super excited as well to just follow you, the series, and just generally as well to keep up with you to see how things are going.
Oh yeah, thanks for having me, guys. I appreciate it.
Oh, anytime. We'll have to get you back on later on in the year as well. But for now, it's been Cabot Bigham as well. Amazing driver, sensational. Please make sure that you go and check him out. You go and follow him on all the social media platforms too, to keep abreast of everything that you need to know about rallycross driving too. It's a very exciting time as well, as we discussed with the new electric cars. So I'm definitely, for one, going to be checking that out as well. But from us on Stripping the Dipping, it's been your boy AMG Denz, aka the North London Chem Block. And until next time, guys, catch you again soon. Peace.